The Secret. Crystal met Sai while at a work conference overseas. Things seemed to click between them and they started dating. Sai even took a job in the US to be closer to her. Everything seemed fine for the first few months until Sai suspected Crystal was seeing another man. One day while at work, she met up with her friend Julie for lunch. Crystal turned her phone on and saw multiple voicemails. She sighed and played them. "Hey babe, it's Sai. I've been trying to reach you these past couple days. Why aren't you picking up? Where are you? I hope everything is okay. Anyway, call me back when you get this message." Crystal thumbed the phone to the next message. "I came by your apartment to see if you were home, but no one answered. So I called your sister, and she said you were still at work. I've just been worried since..." She skipped the message to the next one. "Whatever it is I did or didn't do, could we at least talk about it? I hope you got the flowers I sent." She skipped the rest of that message, then deleted all the messages. Crystal shut her phone off and placed it back in her purse. "Who was that?" Julie asked. "It's no one," Crystal answered, avoiding her eyes. Julie laughed. "That's not what your face says. Is it Danny? What did he do this time? I was gonna say, y'all were just starting to work things out again." "Oh no, Danny and I are doing well. We haven't talked in a few months. Just got to knock some of the rust off, so we're taking it slow," Crystal said. A few weeks afterwards, Crystal ended things with Sai. He was a sweet guy, and they clicked at first, but as time went on, she couldn't stand him, being so needy. Crystal thought Sai was insecure and needed affirmation from her about everything. It was cute in the beginning, but it got lame after a while. Heartbroken, Sai moved back home. Crystal started things back up with her ex-boyfriend Danny. She hadn't told either Danny or Sai, but Crystal was late on her period. She finally took a pregnancy test. Her heart sank upon seeing the 2 lines. She couldn't let either of the men know, especially Sai. Crystal was beautiful, successful, and ambitious. Everything was going well for her, and her promotions in the recent years were reminders of how far she'd come with her career. She would not let anything or anyone derail what she worked so hard for. There was only one obvious solution for her. Crystal terminated the pregnancy the week after she found out. On the day of the procedure, she called Uber to drive her to the clinic and back. No one knew about it, not even her family. Crystal took the week off and told everyone she was sick to recuperate. Sai still missed Crystal and often thought about her. One night, Sai dreamt he was on a tiny boat with Crystal and a little girl. They were in the middle of the ocean. The little girl was already a toddler. He'd never seen her before, but he could sense the girl was his daughter, and he was holding her. She was the most precious baby Sai had ever seen. All of a sudden, the sky darkened with huge black and gray clouds. There was rain, thunder, and lightning. The rain was blinding, and the thunder deafening. The winds were unforgiving, causing the waves to toss the boat around like a rag doll. Sai handed his daughter to Crystal so he could steer the boat to safety, but his efforts were hopeless. In a blink of an eye, lightning struck the boat, shattering it into a dozen pieces. Sai could do nothing but watch Crystal and his baby girl go under the dark waves. He screamed and yelled, trying with all his might to get to them, but the currents were just too strong. A moment later, Crystal emerged from the depths of the water and onto a piece of the boat as it floated further and further away from Sai, but his daughter was nowhere to be seen. Soon, even Crystal was out of sight. Sai awoke from his dreams in tears. Aside from nieces and nephews, he never had a child, at least not yet. Sai always wanted a family if he could ever find the right person. The feelings he had for the girl in his dream, Sai imagined, would be a close indicator of how it would be like if he were ever a parent. It was an unbearable sorrow he'd never wish on anyone. For some mysterious reason, that sense of grief lingered around Sai even after the dream. He didn't want to do anything but mope around. All his friends and family figured his behavior was due to the breakup with the girl he met in the States. But as time went on, Sai didn't eat and started losing weight. He longed for the little girl from his dream. How was it possible to miss someone I've never met so dearly, he thought. Even though it was just a dream, Sai felt like he knew her all his life. Meanwhile, back in the States, on a weeknight, it has been almost 2 weeks since Crystal's procedure. She worked late as usual and barely got into the shower. That was her routine, and like always, Crystal liked her showers hot. The whole bathroom was steamy and the mirror was white with fog. After she was done, Crystal grabbed a towel from the hanger and wrapped it around herself, then stepped out of the shower. She got another towel to dry her hair. Just as Crystal was about to head out of the bathroom, something on the mirror caught her attention. In the top left corner of the mirror were some markings. She leaned in closer to inspect them. Crystal gulped hard and her blood froze when she saw two sets of tiny handprints in the top corner of the mirror. They were the size of a baby's. She was creeped out as much as she was confused. Crystal lived on her own and never had any kids over. She had no idea how those prints could have been formed on her mirror. She quickly wiped them off with her hand and hurried out of the bathroom. A few nights later, there was a set of tiny footprints formed from the fog on the mirror after her shower. That night, instead of sleeping at her apartment, Crystal stayed over at her sister Stephanie's house. The room she stayed in was actually her old room. She moved out when Stephanie got married and had a baby. Crystal stayed over for the week. To avoid any suspicions, she told Stephanie her apartment was repairing a busted pipe, so part of the apartment complex was without water. One night, as Crystal was preparing her lunch in the kitchen, Stephanie's 1-year-old daughter Ava wandered in. She couldn't talk yet, so she babbled. While Crystal stood next to the counter preparing her meals, Ava walked by and started babbling as she pointed at the counter. Thinking Ava was saying hello, Crystal smiled and said, "Oh, hi Ava. Auntie is making lunch for work. Would you like to help?" Suddenly, Ava's face changed into a frightful expression, and she started backing away. As she did, Ava cried hysterically, pointing to the counter next to Crystal. Crystal looked but saw nothing suspicious. For the rest of the week, Ava kept her distance from Crystal, resorting only to pointing and babbling. On another night, while the family was watching TV, Crystal approached Ava for some playtime. Terrified, Ava retreated to her parents. It wasn't like Crystal was ever really close to her niece. Throughout her life, she hardly had any contact with kids until Stephanie had Ava. Even then, Crystal hardly ever came around. It was a reflection of her family dynamics. Their brother Brandon lived with Stephanie, but Crystal barely saw him either. Their family hardly did anything together during the holidays. It also doesn't help that their parents were divorced and both lived out of state. "Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's gotten into her. She's usually not like this, even with strangers," Stephanie said, comforting her daughter. "It's okay," was all Crystal could say. She was just as shocked as Stephanie. All the times she has visited, Ava never reacted in such a manner. That same night, Crystal went to sleep, but woke up to the distant sound of a baby crying. She got out of bed to check, thinking maybe it was Ava crying from the other room. Crystal stepped out of the hallway and made her way towards her sister's room. She stopped and listened. The crying wasn't coming from there. Crystal heard it again. Honing in on it, she walked to the kitchen where the cries got louder. When she got there, they stopped. "It's late and I'm half asleep, so maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that's all," Crystal thought. She was thirsty, so she decided to get a glass of water since she was already in the kitchen. Crystal filled the glass from the dispenser on the fridge. Then she guzzled down the cool, refreshing liquid. She was halfway through her drink when she spotted movement on the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. There was a small, dark, shadowy figure with glowing white eyes on the kitchen counter playing with her hair. Startled, Crystal choked and dropped the glass of water. Shards of glass exploded onto the tile floor, and she felt the splash of water on her bare feet. Crystal coughed and wheezed as she spun around to look for the figure, but it was nowhere to be seen. She glanced back at the refrigerator, but it was gone. "Is everything okay?" asked the woman. Surprised, Crystal whipped her head around to see it was just Stephanie, and she laughed. "Yeah, I just had an accident. Freaking glass slipped out of my hands. Clumsy me. Don't move. I don't want you cutting yourself. I'll get the broom," Stephanie said, making her way to the broom closet. As much as Crystal denied it, in the back of her mind she knew something strange was going on. She never had any paranormal experiences until recently. She couldn't accept the fact that she was indeed being haunted. After that week, Crystal went back to her apartment, but the hauntings continued. If it wasn't the hand and footprints on the foggy mirror, then it was the cries of a baby, the little shadow person darting around corners or next to her. Sometimes it was a combination of 2 or 3 in one night. No matter how good she cleaned the mirror in the bathroom, the prints kept reappearing. It got to the point where Crystal stopped taking hot showers to avoid them. She also started hearing and seeing things at work. It went on for nearly a month until things got worse. Crystal was asleep one night. when suddenly it got really cold. She started shivering and tried to go for the blanket, but she couldn't move. She felt something heavy on her stomach and she couldn't breathe. Crystal thought she was going to suffocate. Then something cold and sharp dug into her belly button. They felt like long nails, but she couldn't be sure since her eyes seemed like they were glued shut. Terrified, Crystal tried to scream and run, but she couldn't get up. The only thing she could do was let out a low whimper. It was as if her body went numb. She could feel something scraping her belly button, some tugging and pulling, but there was no pain. Crystal fought as hard as she could. Just when she thought she'd die from a lack of oxygen, one of her eyes finally peeled open, just enough to see the horror on top of her. Her vision was blurry, but she could see a small, shadowy figure with long tangled hair, pulling and smacking on something long and stringy. Crystal's mobility slowly returned. As it did, so too did her vision, and she regretted it right away. What she saw that day could never be unseen. Fear gripped Crystal tightly as she watched the dark figure with glowing white eyes squat on top of her body, slurping and chewing on her innards. There was blood all over the sheets, with her bowels hanging off the side of her body, and from the ghoul's blood-stained hands and mouth. The smell of iron was overwhelming, and it suddenly brought back memories of when her parents used to butcher pigs. The smell always made her nauseous, and she hated it, but this time it was from her own body. Crystal screamed from the top of her lungs. She sat up, crying, then realized it had been a nightmare. But the dream was so vivid and felt so real, she could still smell the blood. Her face was drenched in sweat, and so was her pillow. Crystal breathed a sigh of relief. She glanced at her phone. It was 3:01 a.m. Too afraid to go back to sleep, she stayed up until it was time to get ready for work. After that night, Crystal stopped sleeping altogether, afraid the dark ghoul would come for her again. The hauntings and night terrors were driving Crystal to the brink of insanity, and her work performance suffered. She endured it until she couldn't anymore. Finally, Crystal went to seek help from a Buddhist monk. "You've committed a great sin against someone, and unless you repent, that person will never forgive you," the monk said. "So I can just pray for forgiveness and everything will be alright?" Crystal asked. "Buddha bless you. I'm afraid it's not that simple. You took something away from someone. It's a dark secret you harbor, but you must confess your sins to that person," answered the monk. Crystal dreaded it at once, but if it needs to be done, she will make sure it gets done like she always had. The next day, she called Sai and told him of the news. After hearing what Crystal had done, Sai's breath shuddered and he hung up, as he did not want to say anything he'd regret. There were things he wanted to say and do, dark, vengeful, and hateful things. Instead, Sai fell to his knees and let out a heart-wrenching wail. Sai prepared an offering for his daughter a few days later. He burned lots of incense and joss money for her. He also offered lots of snacks and candy he thought his daughter would have enjoyed, but never had a chance to. As Sai burned the contents, tears fell from his cheeks as he said to her, "Dear beloved daughter, please accept all the money and food I offer you. It will help you in your path to the next life. I wish you well on your journey. Daddy loves and misses you dearly, even if we only met for a brief moment in my dream. I pray that we can be together again, if not in this lifetime, then the next." Sai eventually met someone years later. They got married and had a baby. It was a baby girl. For Crystal, the hauntings ceased after her confession. She also met someone years later and decided to settle down, but she was never able to have any kids. Each pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. The longest pregnancy she had resulted in a stillborn, and it devastated her. Some say her firstborn cursed her. Others believe it was a result of Crystal's own karma.